There are moments when power asserts itself, not through law or justice, but through the ordinary cruelty displayed before spectators. The afternoon sun reflected off Miller's gas station. Eli Turner, 19 years old, a freshman in college, had come home for fall break and was stranded at the gas station because his mother's old Honda had broken down 2 miles down the highway. His mother was finishing her shift at a restaurant on the other side of town, and Eli had said he would wait here because he didn't want her to leave early. It was a simple plan. Wait an hour, maybe 2, get picked up, go home. Everything should have gone smoothly. But nothing would turn out as expected. The patrol car pulled into the parking lot with deliberate slowness. Eli felt his stomach tighten. He wasn't a college student. He wasn't a young man waiting for his mother. He was just a black kid who didn't belong here. At least, that's how the police officers saw him. He kept his eyes down. Making eye contact with Officer Wade Harlon was like waving a red flag at a bull. Harlon stepped out of the patrol car with his usual slowness. Eli could feel the officer's gaze on him before Harlon was even fully upright. "Look what we have here," Harlon said. "I've been watching you hanging around here for a while, son," he said. Eli kept his voice steady. "I'm just waiting for my car, sir," he replied calmly. He didn't want any trouble. He knew what would happen if he did. "You're waiting, huh?" said Harlon. "The funny thing about waiting is that most people do it in an air-conditioned place. They don't wander around outside watching the surroundings," he continued. A small group of customers had stopped at the pumps and taken out their phones. Eli could see their reflections in the store windows. "I'm not watching," Eli said. "The manager knows me. My mom's car broke down, and I'm waiting for her to finish her work and come back." So he wanted to continue talking. However, "Oh, the manager knows you." Harlan's voice rose a notch. "How interesting. I suppose now you're going to tell me you have very important connections, aren't you?" he said. Eli's heart began to pound in his chest. He knew he should remain silent. He knew from experience that explaining would only make things worse. But the words came out anyway. "My father works for the FBI," he said. The laugh that came out of Harlan's throat was like a gunshot, sharp, explosive, designed to wound. He doubled over, slapping his knee to ensure every spectator got the joke. "Did you hear that?" Harlan croaked, addressing the growing crowd of spectators. "His dad works for the FBI." He straightened up and wiped imaginary tears from his eyes. "Son, I haven't heard that in at least a week. Usually it's my uncle's a lawyer, or I know the mayor, but the FBI? That's first-class stuff." A warmth spread across Eli's neck, not from shame, but from the slow-burning anger he was trying to suppress. He could feel the phone cameras recording, capturing his humiliation in high definition to be shared on social media. Another black kid being harassed, another video that would circulate and disappear, another addition to the endless stream of documented but rarely addressed injustice. "Turn around," Harlan ordered. The humor in his voice suddenly gone. "Put your hands behind your back." "Why?" Eli asked, even though he knew it was better not to question. Harlan's hand clamped onto Eli's shoulder and spun him around roughly. "Loitering, suspicious behavior, and now we can add interfering with an officer's investigation to that." As Harlan deliberately tightened the handcuffs, they bit into Eli's wrists, tighter than procedure required, tight enough to cut off circulation and leave marks. The sharp pull of Eli's arms upward wrenched a scream from his lungs, which Harlan clearly listened to with pleasure. Eli's phone slipped from his pocket during this rough labor, slipped from his pocket and hit the pavement with a crack that echoed through the suddenly silent parking lot. "Oops," Harlan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I guess you should have held him tighter." He shoved Eli unnecessarily forcefully toward the patrol car and paraded him past the gathered onlookers. Some looked away in discomfort, looked away, but didn't intervene. Others, though their faces showed discomfort, kept their phones steady and continued filming. No one spoke up. No one challenged the officer's authority. The hood of the police car was sun-baked metal, and as Harlan pushed Eli toward it, pressing his chest against the scorching surface, it felt like it would burn through Eli's shirt. Eli could smell the burnt oil, the hot metal, and the artificial pine scent from the rearview mirror, scents that would linger in his memory long after the bruises faded. "Everyone has a story," Harlan whispered into Eli's ear, his breath hot and sour. "But the truth is, kid, no one's coming to save you. Not your mom, not the principal, and definitely not your FBI dad who doesn't even exist." Eli saw in the windshield's reflection more phones being raised, their lenses glinting like indifferent eyes in the afternoon sun. A woman at the third pump shook her head and ushered her children into their minivan, choosing safety over involvement. The gas station attendant froze at the door, his name tag reflecting the light, another witness who preferred silence. As Eli shifted his weight trying to find a position that didn't hurt his arms, the handcuffs dug in deeper. The metal warmed against his skin, transmitting the afternoon heat like a brand that declared him guilty without any charges ever being brought. In the distance, a truck's air brakes hissed on the highway, this ordinary sound somehow emphasizing how ordinary this moment should appear. Just routine law enforcement. Just an officer doing his job. Nothing to see here. The refrigerator, the same sound that had accompanied Eli innocently 20 minutes earlier as he waited, now serving as the background music to his public humiliation, its rhythm unchanged by the injustice unfolding beside it. Harlan's boots scraped against the asphalt as he paced slowly and deliberately around the patrol car, keeping Eli waiting, forcing the spectators to watch, making sure everyone understood who held the power here. "We're not very talkative anymore, are we?" Harlan shouted, his voice still tuned for performance. "What happened to all that talk about your FBI connections?" The crowd had grown even larger. More customers stopped to watch, more recorded it on their phones, more witnesses passed by without remembering the young man's face or caring what happened after the recording ended. Harlan's hand landed heavily on Eli's shoulder again. "Time to hit the road, smart kid." He reached for the back door, and Eli saw it then. 2 quick taps on the hood of the patrol car, sharp and deliberate like a secret handshake or coded signal. The sound meant nothing to the onlookers, but Eli had grown up watching the cops in this town. He recognized the coordination the moment he saw it. Another engine roared into the parking lot, the second patrol car screeching its tires on the hot asphalt as it pulled up quickly. Officer Brent Keller stepped out of the car with fluid, experienced movements reflecting a well-rehearsed routine. Eli watched, squinting as Keller approached his own patrol car first. After tapping the hood twice in the same manner as Harlan's signal, he tapped the hood twice in the same manner before starting to walk toward them. "What do we have?" Keller called out, but his tone was not questioning. Like an actor playing his part in a well-rehearsed scene, he was expectant. "We have a non-cooperative suspect," Harlan said, his voice carrying to the other end of the parking lot. "He's been resisting from the start." His fingers found the handcuffs again and twisted them until the metal dug deeper into Eli's wrists, the pain so sharp that Eli had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from screaming and giving them the reaction they wanted. Eli couldn't hold back anymore. "I haven't resisted anything. I've been cooperative from the start." "Did you hear that?" Harlan cut him off and addressed Keller. "Argumentative, aggressive, classic signs of someone who needs to learn respect." Keller nodded, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes gleaming with something like anticipation. "Do we need backup to process him?" "It wouldn't hurt," Harlan replied. "This kid claims his dad's with the FBI. We'll need to document this carefully. You know how these types love to complain." The 2 officers laughed, their voices hard and knowledgeable. They'd done this before, many times. Enough times that they had the confidence of men who'd never encountered the signs, the scenarios, the outcomes. But what neither officer noticed was the black SUV that had just pulled into the far end of the parking lot. Government plates, tinted windows. The engine was still running. Eli saw it. He watched from the side mirror of the patrol car as the driver's door opened. He watched a man in a dark suit step out, his movements carrying a controlled authority that made Harlan's theatrical air seem like amateur theater. The man was tall, black, perhaps in his mid-40s, with short-cropped hair graying at the temples. He wore sunglasses that reflected the afternoon sun like a mirror, and his suit jacket sat perfectly despite the heat, tailored to fit the service weapon holstered at his waist. He didn't rush. He simply walked toward the scene with determined, purposeful steps, his ID ready and visible in his left hand, his right hand resting comfortably by his weapon. He felt something relax in his chest, not relief, not yet, but recognition. His walk, his stance, the way he moved through space, like someone accustomed to command. "Officer," the man said, his voice a quiet authority that cut through Harlan's performance, more effective than shouting. "Step away from the subject." Harlan turned his head, a clear annoyance visible on his face at the interruption. "Excuse me, this is a law enforcement matter. When the ID became clear, he cut himself off. FBI, Special Agent, and beneath it, a name that shook Harlan's confident expression, David Mitchell. "I said move away from him," David repeated, his voice steady but carrying an authority that made it clear this was not a request. Now, Keller halted mid-step, his hand drifting toward his radio as police automatically do when backup is needed. But David's attention was focused on Harlan with the intensity of a hunter who had just spotted his prey. "Sir, with all due respect," Harlan began, trying to regain his cool demeanor. "You don't want to finish that sentence," David cut him off quietly. "You really don't." He approached and Eli could see the phone spinning, the cameras now capturing this new development with the same eager interest they had shown in his humiliation. The story was changing, the balance of power was shifting, and the audience could feel it. "You handcuffed my son to a police car," David said, his voice still quiet but now with a sharp edge. "So I'm asking you once more, very politely, to remove the handcuffs and step back. Then you and I will have a conversation about possible cause, excessive force, and what happens when police see 19-year-old college students as easy targets. The parking lot was quiet except for the hum of the freezer and the distant highway traffic. Even the phones held their breath, beginning to record history as it unfolded from one outcome to the next. Harlan's hand moved toward the keys on his belt, but his face flushed. Not with shame, but with anger at being challenged in front of the spectators, at being forced to back down, at being exposed as less than his authority. "You'll regret this," Harlan said quietly, his words meant only for David's ears but still picked up by the nearest phones. David's expression didn't change. "Remove his handcuffs, now." The afternoon sun shone indifferently overhead, oblivious to the human drama unfolding beneath it. Officer Wade Harlon reached for his keys, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from anger at having to release his prey, and Eli Turner, 19 years old, a freshman in college, the son of an FBI agent, waited to be freed from handcuffs that had no legal justification for being on him in the first place. The handcuffs clicked open with an unnatural loudness in the sudden silence of the parking lot. Eli's wrists bore red marks where the metal had dug deep, and his skin was already beginning to bruise. He carefully bent his fingers and felt a tingling sensation in his hands as the blood flow returned. David immediately stepped between Eli and Harlan, his body language protective but controlled. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his eyes scanning Eli's injuries, his attention divided between his son and the two police officers. "Yes," Eli said, his voice harsher than he intended. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." David's voice was gentle but realistic. He took out his phone and switched it to camera mode. "But you will be. Eli, I want you to stand in the sunlight where everyone can see you. Don't move, don't touch anything. Just let me document this." The afternoon sun provided perfect light, and David photographed Eli's wrists from various angles. Red marks and forming bruises were clearly visible. The phones that had recorded Eli's humiliation now captured this reversal, and their owners became silent witnesses to a story unfolding in real time. Harlan stood a few meters away, his hand still reflexively at his belt in a police stance, but his previous cocky attitude was gone. Keller had approached his colleague. Eli couldn't tell if it was solidarity or strategy. "Officer Harlan," David said, his phone now recording video, "can you explain the possible reason for this stop?" "He was loitering," Harlan began. "In this area, loitering is not a crime without a specific sign prohibiting it," David calmly interrupted. "And even if it were, it doesn't justify handcuffing an obedient person with enough force to cause injury." "Try again." Harlan's jaw tightened. Suspicious behavior. Numerous complaints from the gas station owner. "I want to know the owner's name and the details of the complaints," David continued, his tone remaining professionally neutral, his questions cutting like surgical. "I also want to know the CAD number for these calls, the timestamps and the names of the complainants." Keller stepped forward to support his partner. "Sir, with all due respect, this is still an ongoing investigation. You absolutely must, Officer Keller." David's attention shifted to the second officer without leaving Harlan. "Because what I'm seeing is two officers making an illegal stop, using excessive force on a young man." "I'm 19, Eli quietly interjected. "I'm a college student." "Thank you, Eli." David nodded. Excessive force was used against a 19-year-old college student waiting for his mother to get off work after his car broke down. "I see that the handcuffs were applied with enough force to cause visible injuries. I see that personal belongings were deliberately destroyed." He pointed to Eli's shattered phone on the ground. "And I see coordination between two officers who arrived separately, but whose approaches appear remarkably synchronized." David paused, letting the impact of his words sink in as his phone continued to record. The gas station attendant had now completely exited the building and was watching with wide eyes. Several customers had abandoned their cars to watch, forming an audience larger than the one drawn by Harlan's initial performance. "Here's what's going to happen," David continued. "You will give me your names, badge numbers, and the incident report number you will fill out regarding this stop. In that report, you will document every action you took and your reasons for taking it. Then I will file a formal complaint with your department, the state police, and the FBI's Civil Rights Division." "The FBI?" Harlan's laughter was forced and brittle, for a simple stop that got a little out of hand. "For a pattern," David corrected quietly. "Because this isn't the first time, is it, Officer Harlan? This is just the first time someone with the resources to fight back has followed through." Something flashed across Harlan's face. Perhaps recognition, perhaps calculation. Keller's hand drifted to his radio again, and David noticed the movement immediately. "I wouldn't do that," David said softly. "Whatever you're thinking of searching for, whatever kind of coordination you're thinking of, I strongly advise against it." Every second of this interaction is being recorded by numerous cameras, including mine, every word, every movement, and I'm very, very good at documenting inappropriate behavior. Eli watched his father's work with a kind of detached fascination. This wasn't the father who made terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings, or patiently and kindly taught him to drive. This was Special Agent David Mitchell, with 15 years of FBI experience, and he was tearing these officers apart with the precision of someone who had done this before. Badge number, David repeated, phone steady and recording. Now. Harlan clenched his teeth and rattled off the numbers. Keller followed suit, his previous confidence completely gone. David took notes on his phone as the video recording continued, building a chain of evidence admissible in any court. The stop was lawful. Harlan tried again, his voice less convincing than before. We had reasonable suspicion. There was a black kid standing by the gas station. David cut him off. That's not reasonable suspicion. That's racial profiling. Excessive force, willful destruction of property, public humiliation. That's not policing. That's civil rights violations. Turning to the watching crowd, he raised his voice slightly but remained in control. I want to thank everyone who recorded this incident. Your footage is very important. If you wish to give witness statements, please come see me after the officers leave. Your footage could be crucial evidence. A few people nodded, still holding their phones in the air. The gas station attendant took out a business card and wrote something on the back. The woman at the third pump who had hurriedly taken her children away earlier had returned and was determinedly recording with her own phone. David turned to the officers. You can go. Write your incident report. I'll be writing my report to many agencies. Let the investigation determine who's telling the truth. This isn't over, Harlan said quietly, barely concealing the threat. No, David agreed. This is just the beginning. And Officer Harlan? That statement you just made? It was recorded. Later, when you wonder how your career became the subject of a federal investigation, you can replay this moment and remember that threatening an FBI agent's family member while being filmed by a dozen witnesses was probably not your best tactical decision. Harlan's face turned several shades of red, then he turned sharply and walked toward the patrol car. Keller followed him more slowly, turning back once to look at him with an expression that could have been regret or calculation. Both patrol cars pulled out of the parking lot with deliberate slowness, without sirens or urgency, with the measured retreat of men who had lost the battle but were not ready to concede it. They pulled out of the parking lot with deliberate slowness. As soon as they were gone, David's whole demeanor changed. The federal agent vanished, replaced by a worried father. He carefully picked up Eli, being mindful of his injured wrists. I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner, David said quietly. I was 20 minutes away when your mother called. She said the car had broken down and you were waiting with Miller. I had a bad feeling, so I came straight here. How did you know? Eli asked. Because this is Miller's gas station, David replied, stepping back to look at his son. And because Officer Wade Harlon has worked in this area for 8 years. And because 19 years ago, a mechanic named James Mitchell tried to report corruption in this department and died in a single vehicle accident. Eli's stomach nodded. They rarely spoke of James Mitchell, Eli's biological father, the man who died when Eli was 3 months old, the ghost who shaped his entire life even though Eli never remembered him. That's why my mom moved, Eli said, the pieces falling into place. That's why we never came back here, until we had to, David finished. Grandma's inheritance. Your mother inherited the house, and we've been trying to sell it for months. And all this time I've been worried about exactly this scenario. Instead of the park, he gestured toward the place where Eli had been handcuffed. James documented everything, Eli. Incidents of excessive force, illegal searches, planted evidence, plans to seize civilian property, all of it. He gave the documents to a lawyer friend who was supposed to take them to the state police. That lawyer died in a house fire 2 weeks before James's car accident. As the afternoon sun beat down on them, David pulled a folder from the SUV's worn manila, its edges softened from years of use. Inside were photocopied documents, photographs, handwritten notes in neat block letters. I've been carrying this for 19 years, David said. I was waiting for the right moment, the right leverage. Your mother doesn't know I kept this. She wanted to forget it, move on with her life, keep you safe by staying away. But I couldn't forget it because James was right. The corruption he documented didn't go away. It just got better at hiding. Eli stared at the folder, at the handwriting that described the injustice documented by his biological father with the meticulousness and sensitivity of someone who understood the importance of evidence. So today wasn't a coincidence. No, David confirmed. Harlan was one of the officials James documented, so was Keller. And if my research is correct, they were part of a network that had been operating for at least 20 years. Asset forfeiture, planted evidence, witness intimidation, all coordinated by a structure that appeared to be a legitimate law enforcement agency. He showed Eli a photo from the folder, a young Wade Harlon, with the caption, "This company is sought for every vehicle seized under suspicious circumstances. The company's owner, Gideon Rohr, is Harlon's brother-in-law. Do you see the pattern?" Eli saw it. Cars seized during suspicious stops were being towed by a company with family connections, then sold at auction for a song to buyers who knew exactly when and where to bid. A perfect cycle of corruption, generating cash while maintaining the appearance of legal procedure. "So what happens now?" Eli asked. David closed the file. "Now we're documenting everything. I'll file an official complaint through the proper channels. We'll push for an investigation, and we'll wait for them to make a mistake. They'll come after us," said Eli, thinking of Harlan's parting threat. "They will," David confirmed. "But Eli, they made a crucial mistake today. They targeted you while I was close enough to intervene. They gave me a reason to open an investigation. And most importantly, they did it in broad daylight, in front of witnesses recording every second." He pointed to the gas station attendant approaching with his business card. "They're used to working in the dark, both literally and figuratively. They stand in places where no one sees them. Victims who can't fight back. Evidence that disappears. But today we have light." The attendant handed David his card. "I'm Marcus. I've been working here for 6 years. I've seen Harlon play the same game at least 12 times. Different kids, same scenario. I never said anything because—" He trailed off in shame. "Because standing up to corrupt cops is dangerous," David finished gently, "especially if they're under corporate protection. But Marcus, if you're ready to testify about what you've seen, you can help end this cycle." Marcus nodded slowly. "The security cameras recorded everything. I can get you the footage before it's accidentally deleted. That's always what happens when these checks go badly." "Do it right away," David said. "And Marcus, thank you. What you did is very important." As Marcus entered, the other witnesses approached. The woman at the third pump, a truck driver who had been watching everything. Harlon, an elderly man leaving the store when he first confronted Eli. One by one, they gave their statements, provided their contact information, and submitted video files. What began as Eli's humiliation was turning into something else entirely, a foundation for witness unity, evidence gathering, and accountability. An hour later, when Eli's mother arrived, pale with worry, David had taken statements from 11 witnesses, obtained the gas station's security camera footage, and filed preliminary complaints with 3 different regulatory agencies. "I'm fine, Mom," Eli said immediately when he saw his mother's concern. "My dad got here in time." His mother hugged him tightly, then examined his wrist with slightly trembling fingers. "These marks, they will be photographed, documented, and added to the civil rights complaint," David said, "along with everything else." Eli handled this situation exactly right. He remained calm, complied, and stayed safe. "Because you came here," his mother said quietly. "But what about next time? What if you're not 20 minutes away?" "Next time," David replied, "they'll think twice before targeting someone in this town, because from now on they know they're being watched. They know their patterns have been identified, and they know that every victim won't just disappear silently into the system." The afternoon sun was beginning to set, painting the gas station in amber and gold tones. The lunch rush was long over, and the parking lot was quiet except for the constant hum of the refrigerator and the distant highway traffic. Eli looked at the place where he had been handcuffed, where Harlon had asserted his dominance over the spectators, who at first seemed complicit in their silence. But the spectators had changed from passive observers to active witnesses, from people who ignored injustice to people who documented it and demanded accountability. "Did James know?" Eli asked quietly. "My biological father. Did he know what he was risking when he started documenting?" David's expression softened. "Yes, he knew. Your mother, for your sake, asked him to stop, to give up, to not draw attention. But James believed that even if fighting was dangerous, some things were worth fighting for. He died for that," Eli said. "He died trying to fix things," David corrected. "There's a difference. And Eli, today, standing your ground, telling the truth even though you knew it would make things worse, refusing to back down, that's James's courage. His legacy lives on in you." Eli's mother let out a sound between a sob and a laugh. "For 19 years I tried to keep you out of this fight, and now you're right in the middle of it." "Not in the middle," said David. "At the beginning. This fight started 19 years ago, when James documented the corruption and paid the price. It continued when those officials thought they could bury the truth along with the man who spoke it. And today it has entered a new phase, a phase where we have resources, allies, and evidence that won't disappear." He looked directly at Eli. "But the choice is yours. You can walk away from this. Go back to college, focus on your studies, leave the investigation to the adults. No one will blame you." Eli thought of the handcuffs tightening around his wrists. He thought of Harlan's laughter echoing in the parking lot. About witnesses who finally found the courage to speak after years of silence. About his father, a man he never knew, who died trying to uncover the truth. "No," he said quietly. I won't back down. If they're targeting us because they see us as easy prey, someone has to show them they're wrong. Someone has to stand up." David nodded, pride appearing on his face. "Then let's do this right. Let's document everything. Let's build a case so solid that even corporate corruption can't deny it. And let's finally get justice for James Mitchell's death and all the victims who came after him." The sun continued to set, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt of the gas station. But unlike the darkness where Harlan's corruption, these shadows were merely the natural progression of light, temporary, harmless, soon to be replaced by a new day. And on that new day, Eli Turner, David Mitchell, and the coalition of witnesses who had finally found their courage would begin the work of turning the documents into justice. The next morning, at Miller's gas station, 40 miles away, bright autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of the Maple County Regional FBI office, a plain building that resembled an insurance company more than a federal law enforcement headquarters. Eli sat in the conference room across from Special Agent Rachel Cortez, David's colleague who specialized in civil rights violations and police corruption. "Tell me again," Cortez said, activating the recording device and filling her notebook with meticulous handwriting. "Start from the moment you first noticed Officer Harlan's patrol car entering the parking lot." Eli had told this story twice, last night to David and an hour ago to Cortez. But he understood the process. Consistency was important. Details mattered. Each retelling either strengthened or weakened the case. "I saw the patrol car arrive around 3:45 p.m., Eli began, forcing himself to remember despite wanting to forget. "I was standing next to the freezer because it was in the shade. My phone was dead, so I was waiting." The police car slowly entered the parking lot and parked near the pumps. Cortez took notes, occasionally stopping him to clarify the timing or location. The morning sun lit the conference room so clearly it made lying difficult. Every micro-expression visible, every hesitation noticeable. "So when did you first say your father was an FBI agent?" "After Harlan asked me if I had important connections. I didn't say it to threaten him or gain the upper hand. I said it because—" Eli paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I thought if he knew my father was in the FBI, he would back off. I thought it would calm things down." "But it had the opposite effect," Cortez observed. "Yes." He laughed. He joked with the crowd. "Then things got even worse." Cortez opened the photos on his tablet. Eli's wrists from different angles, the shattered phone, the handcuffing, and screenshots from witness videos showing Harlan's behavior. "These injuries are consistent with excessive force. Witness statements corroborate your account. The coordination between Harlan and Keller, those hooded men you noticed, that's significant." "Why?" Eli asked. "Because it shows this was premeditated and organized behavior. Police officers working alone make bad decisions individually. Police officers working in coordination act as a network." He opened a map on his tablet showing Miller's gas station and the surrounding area. "David mentioned the documents from your biological father 19 years ago. I've been reviewing those files all morning." He spread photocopies across the conference table. James Mitchell's meticulous notes documenting traffic stops, seizures, and suspicious accidents. Dates, times, license plates, badge numbers. The work of someone who understood that evidence had to be flawless to be significant. James documented 17 suspicious vehicle seizures over an 18-month period, Cortez explained. Each one involved minority drivers. Every seized vehicle was towed by Rohr's Auto Recovery, and every vehicle was auctioned off to one of 3 buyers who always knew exactly when and where to bid. He pulled up the company records. These 3 buyers? They're shell companies registered to non-existent addresses, with unaccountable owners. But the money trail leads to a real estate investment company where Gideon Rohr is a silent partner, where he serves as a partner. "So they're illegally seizing cars, selling them through fake companies and pocketing the money," Eli said. The simplicity of the plan made it no less disturbing. "Exactly. And the managers involved are taking bribes in the form of consulting fees paid by Rohr's company for security services. This is money laundering disguised as a legitimate business." Cortez pulled up the financial records. Wade Harlon reported an additional $47,000 in income last year from Rohr's Auto Recovery. Brent Keller reported $38,000. The other 4 officers in the same department also reported similar payments. "So it's not just 2 bad cops," Eli said. "It's a criminal organization operating under the guise of the law," Cortez corrected. "That makes it a federal crime. RICO laws apply to organized crime activities involving multiple actors and extortion." David entered the conference room with coffee and a thick file. "Judge Crowley denied our request to have Harlan's complaint history investigated by third parties. He said the department's internal review was sufficient." "Crowley," Cortez repeated, taking note. "Isn't he the judge? The judge who ruled James Mitchell's death an accident despite evidence to the contrary?" David finished. "Yes. The judge who has been handling asset forfeiture cases in this county for 23 years. the judge who approved 97% of the seizure warrants requested by this department. Crowley spread statistics across the table comparing the judge's approval rates with other judges in neighboring counties. The difference was stark. While other judges approved 60 to 70% of seizure warrants, Crowley's rate consistently exceeded 95%. He's part of it, Eli said, recognizing the pattern. We can't prove that yet, David cautioned. But the statistical anomaly is significant enough to warrant an investigation. Cortez, can we request a federal review of his search warrant approvals? I've drafted the request, Cortez replied. But Chief, this is going to get ugly. When we start pulling these strings, the whole network will react. They've been operating with impunity for 20 years. They won't go down quietly. As if to make that prediction come true, David's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face hardened. Marcus just texted. Someone broke into Miller's gas station last night. They stole the security system's DVR. All of yesterday's footage is gone. The conference room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Eli felt his stomach knot up. The evidence, the documentation of Harlan's performance and coordination had vanished in an instant. The witnesses have their phones, Cortez said immediately, already starting to take notes. 11 people provided video. They can't erase all of them. They can intimidate the witnesses and make them erase it, David replied, or claim their memories are unreliable, or suddenly decide they don't want to get involved. The phone rang again, then again. The rapid succession of messages, each one drained the color from his face. What? David showed him the screen. Text messages from 3 different witnesses, the woman at the third pump, the truck driver, the old man, all sent nearly identical messages within minutes of each other. I've had time to think. I don't want to get involved. I'm deleting the footage. Please don't contact me again. Coordinated, Cortez said grimly. Someone visited them this morning. All 3. Didn't visit, David corrected, opening the truck driver's message and zooming in on the timestamp. These were sent between 6:15 and 6:30 a.m. This is intimidation, probably uniformed officers making courtesy visits about ongoing investigations. Eli felt the careful structure they had built yesterday crumbling. The evidence was disappearing. Witnesses were recanting their statements. The system was protecting itself with tactics perfected over decades. We still have 11 witnesses, Eli said. If 3 recant, we'll have 8 witnesses left. Another buzz, another message, then 2 more. By noon, only 3 witnesses remained willing to testify. Marcus, the gas station attendant, a young man named Deshaun who recorded from his car, and Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman waiting to fill a prescription at the pharmacy next door. 3 out of 11 witnesses. David looked at his phone screen and said quietly, they've been protecting their power this way for 20 years. Systematic intimidation, calculated pressure, making people too uncertain to speak or trust their own memories. So what do we do? Eli asked. Cortez opened another file. We broaden the scope. Your case isn't the first instance of this, just the first time someone with resources has fought back. If we can identify other victims, establish a pattern spanning years, individual witness suppression becomes less effective. He showed them a database he'd created. Traffic stops, seizures, arrests, all cross-referenced with officer name, location, and outcome. Over the past 5 years, I've identified 47 suspicious stops involving Harlon, Keller, or officers connected to them. 47 people who might have similar stories. Maybe, David emphasized. After seeing witnesses intimidated, how many do you think will actually speak up? Enough, Cortez said with quiet confidence. Because some have been waiting for years for someone to ask. Some have been carrying this anger, this injustice, waiting for a moment when speaking up would truly matter. He gave a specific case as an example. Tyrell Washington, 19 years old, pulled over 3 years ago for failing to signal. His car was impounded, sold at auction. Tyrell tried to fight it, hired a lawyer, filed complaints. Every appeal was denied by Judge Crowley. He eventually gave up, but I contacted him this morning. He played a voicemail. The voice of a young man, controlled but reflecting years of pent-up anger. If you're really investigating those cops, if you're really filing a lawsuit, I want to be part of it. I was waiting for someone who cared about what they did to me. That's one, Cortez said. I left messages for 15 more people. I hope at least half will respond. The afternoon sun streamed through the conference room windows as they pieced together their case from witness statements and documents. Deshaun arrived around 2 p.m., a 17-year-old high school senior, accompanied by his mother. Both looked tense but determined. I recorded everything, Deshaun said, showing his phone. My mom wanted me to delete it, said dealing with the police was dangerous. But I kept it anyway because what they did to that college kid was wrong. And if no one speaks up, nothing will change. His mother, Patricia Johnson, squeezed her son's shoulder. My son is braver than me. This morning when the police came to our house and tried to convince him to delete the video, I almost forced him to do it. But Deshaun reminded me that 8 years ago, his uncle was shot during a traffic stop. The police said his uncle reached for a gun. The gun was never found. No charges were ever filed, and we stayed silent because we were afraid. She looked directly at David. Agent Mitchell, if you're really gonna fight this, if you're really gonna hold them accountable, we want to help. My son's footage is yours. And I will testify about this morning's intimidation. 2 uniformed police officers came at 6:20 a.m. and said it would be safer for Deshaun not to get involved. By 4 p.m., they had taken statements from Deshaun and his mother, confirmed that Marcus's security camera footage had been backed up to cloud storage before the theft, and received responses from 6 victims Cortez had contacted. Each had a story similar to Eli's: suspicious stops, excessive force, seized property, and a system that protected the officers while ignoring the victims. David's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered on speakerphone. Agent Mitchell? The voice belonged to a man, elderly and carefully neutral. My name is Robert Chen. I'm a defense attorney in Maple County. I've been practicing law for 32 years, and during that time I've seen the corruption you're investigating ruin lives. Mr. Chen, thank you for calling, but I have files, Chen interrupted. 17 years of cases where my clients were targets of this network. Documented threats, fabricated evidence, coerced confessions. I kept records because I knew one day someone would find this worth investigating. He paused for a moment. I'm Mrs. Chen's husband. My wife went to the gas station yesterday to pick up some medicine and saw what happened to your son. She came home very angry, Agent Mitchell. She was angrier than I've ever seen her in years. What exactly do you have? David asked carefully. Everything. Client files containing documented instances of abuse. Recorded conversations with officers who thought attorney-client privilege would protect them. Financial records showing the flow of money between seized funds and bribes. I've been preparing a case for years, waiting for someone with the federal authority to actually prosecute this. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Cortez asked. Because the last lawyer who tried died in a house fire, Chen said plainly. His name was Marcus Wells. He was a friend of James Mitchell's. 19 years ago, he had evidence of this corruption. 2 weeks before he was scheduled to meet with state investigators, his house burned down. They said it was an electrical fire. A very convenient electrical fire. The conference room fell silent. As David and Cortez looked at each other, Eli felt a chill in his stomach. Are you saying James Mitchell's documents weren't the only evidence that disappeared? David asked quietly. I'm saying this network has protected itself for at least 20 years through intimidation, corruption, and violence when necessary, Chen replied. Individual victims couldn't stand up to institutional power, so they got away with it. But Agent Mitchell, you are not an individual victim. You are a federal law enforcement officer with resources and authority, and if you are serious about fighting them, I am ready to help. By evening, their investigation had shifted from documenting a single incident to uncovering a decades-long criminal conspiracy. Robert Chen's files provided the historical foundation. The latest victims, Tyrell Washington and 6 others, provided the current patterns. Eli's case sparked the interest of federal authorities. David drove Eli back to his mother's inherited house as the sunset painted the sky with amber and gold tones. The house was on the edge of town, a small 2-bedroom house that had belonged to Eli's grandmother. They had been trying to sell it for months, but now Eli understood why his mother didn't want to sell it. She wanted to keep it as a backup, Eli said as he drove the car into the driveway. In case we had to come back, in case we had to finish what James started. Your mother wanted to protect you, David corrected gently. She watched James die fighting this corruption. She didn't want to lose you the same way. But we're still fighting, Eli said. Because they made it personal, David replied. They could have left you alone. They could have seen his FBI badge and backed off. But Harlan's arrogance, his need to show off, his belief that he could get away with humiliating a black kid under federal protection, it was a miscalculation. They sat in the car as dusk closed in around them, but there was still enough light to see clearly. Eli's mother appeared in the doorway, her silhouette illuminated by the warm lights inside. She knows we won't stop, Eli said. She's known since yesterday, David confirmed. And she's terrified. But she's also angry. She ran for 19 years, kept quiet, kept you out of this fight. But they found you anyway. They targeted you anyway. She's ready to stop running. What happens next? David pulled out his phone and showed Eli the schedule Cortez had prepared. Tomorrow we'll meet with 6 victims who are ready to testify. On Thursday, Robert Chen will hand over the files to federal prosecutors. On Friday, we'll submit the entire case to the U.S. Attorney's Office and request a RICO investigation. By next week, this will go from being a local police matter to a federal crime conspiracy case. What about Harlan? He'll realize too late that laughing at a 19-year-old college student was the beginning of the end, David said quietly. Because everything he did yesterday, excessive force, coordination with Keller, intimidation, it's all documented. It's all evidence. And it will all be used to dismantle the network he's been part of his entire career. Eli's mother banged on the car window, her concern evident even through the glass. David and Eli got out of the car, and their mother hugged them both tightly. "Robert Chen called me," she said quietly. "He told me about what you're planning. Eli, baby, are you sure about this? Getting involved, testifying, making yourself a target?" "Mom, I'm already a target," Eli replied. "Yesterday proved that. Running away doesn't work. Staying silent doesn't work. The only thing that works is to stand up to them with evidence they can't erase, and witnesses they can't intimidate." She looked at David with teary eyes. "James died that way too, fighting the same fight." "James died alone," David gently corrected. "With just one lawyer and buried documents. We are not alone. We have federal resources, numerous witnesses, lawyers ready to help, and decades of documented trails. This time, the evidence won't vanish with convenient accidents." "You can't promise that," she whispered. "No," David conceded. "But I can promise we'll fight smart, document everything, and not let Eli face this alone. What happened yesterday was unacceptable, and the system that made it possible cannot continue." As the sun set, a family bound by blood and choice stood in the driveway, preparing for a battle that began 19 years ago when a mechanic named James Mitchell chose truth over silence. Inside the house, Eli found his biological father's mechanic's certificate hanging on the wall in a small frame his grandmother had hidden. James Mitchell was written on the nameplate, Master Technician, a man who worked with his hands, who understood the precision of engines and that lies would eventually crumble under pressure. Eli gently touched the frame. "We'll finish this," he said quietly to the photo of a man he never knew. "What you started, what you died for. We'll make it meaningful." Outside, night had completely fallen, but morning would come, and with it the next phase of the struggle that would either deliver justice or prove that some systems were too powerful to challenge. His hand chose to believe in justice, because the alternative was surrender, and surrender had never been an option. 2 weeks after the gas station incident, the federal courthouse in the regional capital was bathed in the light of the early November sun, its granite steps crowded with media vehicles and protesters carrying signs reading "Justice for James Mitchell" and "End Police Corruption." Inside, the grand jury gathered to hear the 43-page indictment compiled over 14 days by Special Agent Rachel Cortez and Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Brennan. Eli sat in the witness waiting room with David and his mother, watching the number of protesters growing outside the tall windows. What had started as a personal humiliation had turned into something bigger. A community that had been systematically silenced for decades was finally making its voice heard. "Are you nervous?" David asked quietly. "I'm scared," Eli admitted, "but I'm ready." The door opened and Cortez emerged, his face wearing a professional expression of neutrality, but his eyes full of satisfaction. The grand jury just accepted the indictment. 18 defendants, including Wade Harlon, Brent Keller, Gideon Rohr, and Judge Crowley. RICO charges, civil rights violations, conspiracy, and charges related to the death of James Mitchell for 3 defendants, including Harlon. Eli's mother let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "Murder charges. 19 years later?" "New evidence," Cortez explained, pulling out his tablet and showing photos of the scene of James Mitchell's alleged accident. Robert Chen had hired an independent accident reconstruction expert years ago, but no one had wanted to look at it. According to the expert's report, James's car had been forced off the road by another vehicle. The paint marks on the bumper matched a 2004 model Crown Victoria, a standard patrol car. According to phone records Chen obtained, Wade Harlon had called Brent Keller from a location 3 miles from the crash site 17 minutes before James's accident. By examining cell tower data showing the locations of police officers that night, he determined where the police were that night. Harlon and Keller's phones sent signals to cell towers along the route James was taking. They followed him. They forced him off the road. Then they called it an accident, and Judge Crowley approved the decision without a proper investigation. David examined the evidence with the intensity of someone who had spent 15 years working on cases. Will this hold up? The accident reconstruction expert is Dr. Patricia Vance, a former FBI forensic analyst with 30 years of experience, Brennan said, joining them from the grand jury room. Her testimony is flawless. Combined with phone records, paint transfer analysis, and intimidation tactics targeting everyone connected to James's investigation, we have enough strong circumstantial evidence for a murder conspiracy charge. When? Eli's mother asked in a trembling voice. When will they arrest them? Search warrants are being executed right now, Brennan replied. Federal marshals are coordinating with state police to take 18 suspects into custody simultaneously. By noon, everyone charged will be in federal custody awaiting trial. As if summoned by his words, the front windows of the courthouse revealed a scene unfolding in real time. Federal vehicles pulled up, and sheriffs emerged with handcuffed orange jumpsuit-clad prisoners. Wade Harlon was first in line, his previous swagger completely gone as cameras captured him climbing the granite steps. Brent Keller followed, head bowed, refusing to meet the protesters' gaze. Then came Gideon Rohr, Judge Crowley, and 14 others, their corruption network on display before the community they had victimized. The protesters' chants echoed louder, "Justice for James! Justice for James!" The sound pierced the thick walls of the courthouse, a collective voice that had been silent for far too long. Eli watched Harlan climb the stairs, remembering the police's laughter 2 weeks ago, their indifferent cruelty, their certainty they would go unpunished. Now that certainty had turned into visible fear, as Harlan faced federal charges that could mean life in prison. "It feels surreal," Eli said quietly. "Justice seems to be finding its place," David corrected. Slowly but inevitably, morning proceeded with routine efficiency, the reading of the charges, bail hearings, the appointment of public defenders for those unable to afford private counsel. Judge Harriet Morrison, brought in from another district due to the jeopardy of Judge Crowley's position, denied bail for all 18 defendants on the grounds of flight risk and danger to witnesses. "These charges," Judge Morrison said from the bench, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority, alleged a criminal conspiracy spanning more than 20 years. The evidence points to systematic witness intimidation, destruction of evidence, and possible murder in the cases of Officers Harlan and Keller. Bail is denied until the trial concludes. Harlan's attorney, a well-dressed private lawyer named Gerald Vance, immediately objected. "Your Honor, my client has served this community for 19 years. He has deep roots, family ties, no criminal record. Your client has 47 complaints of excessive force, systematically dismissed." Judge Morrison cut him off. "He has financial ties to a criminal organization, and he is accused of conspiring to murder James Mitchell, a witness who threatened to expose corruption. These are not the characteristics of someone with a minimal risk of flight." He looked at the defendants wearing orange jumpsuits. "Everyone in this courtroom is accused of participating in or enabling a system that terrorizes defenseless citizens, steals property, and silences dissent through threats or worse. If even half of the prosecution's allegations are true, releasing any defendant on bail would endanger every witness brave enough to testify." The ruling stood. All 18 defendants remained in federal custody. As Eli exited the courtroom, he was surrounded by protesters who recognized him from the news. "Thank you," said a young black woman, tears streaming down her face. "My brother was one of the 47 people stopped. They took his car, said he was dealing drugs. He wasn't. But Judge Crowley ruled against him anyway. Fighting this, we lost everything. Thank you for not staying silent." An elderly black man approached, leaning heavily on his cane. "James Mitchell was my nephew. I watched them destroy him for trying to do the right thing. I thought justice would never be served. But you stood up. You didn't let them silence you. James would be proud." People approached one by one, recounting stories of harassment, theft, intimidation. The suppressed testimonies of a community were finally being voiced. Eli listened to each one, recording names and contact information for Cortez's expanding witness list. By the afternoon, they gathered statements from 32 more victims. Cortez's case, already strong, had such a comprehensive and systematic pattern that even the most skeptical juror would struggle to dismiss it as coincidence or individual misconduct. That evening, when Eli returned to the house he had inherited from his mother, he found the house transformed into an impromptu community meeting. Robert Chen was there, with case files spread out on the dining room table. Marcus from the gas station had brought security camera footage of other incidents he had witnessed. Tyrell Washington and 6 other victims were comparing their experiences, finding solace in shared trauma and collective action. Deshaun and his mother Patricia arrived with a laptop displaying social media posts documenting years of complaints about "people have been talking about this online for years," Patricia explained. But everyone thought they were alone, that no one would believe them. Now they understand it's been systematic from the start. David stood at the head of the table, organizing testimony and evidence with the precision of someone who had previously prepared RICO cases. "The prosecution's timeline has 47 suspected stops over 5 years. But with your additional documents, we're looking at over 200 incidents spanning 19 years. Each one fits the same pattern: minority drivers, suspicious possible reasons, property seizure, and outcomes that benefit the defendants financially." Robert Chen produced financial records showing the flow of money through shell companies. Rohr's Auto Recovery received $4.7 million from vehicle seizures over 10 years. These vehicles were auctioned off for a total of approximately $800,000, a significant loss in value that no one questioned. The difference actually went to withdrawal fees, storage costs, and administrative expenses paid as bribes to officials and Judge Crowley. "How did Crowley get paid?" Eli asked. "Legal consulting fees," Chen replied, showing company records. Rohr's company paid Crowley's private law firm $340,000 over 8 years for legal advice on asset seizure procedures. This is money laundering under the guise of legitimate business expenses. As everyone grasped the scale of the corruption, the room fell silent. Not just individual officials abusing their power, but an organized crime syndicate operating openly for years because it controlled the accountability mechanisms. Eli's mother emerged from the kitchen with coffee, her hands steadier than they had been in weeks. So what happens at the trial? Brennan expects jury selection to begin in 6 weeks, David replied. The prosecution will present financial evidence, the pattern of suppression, victim statements proving systematic targeting, and expert analysis of James's crash. The defense will argue that the officers acted independently, that the financial payments were legitimate, and that James's death was actually an accident. Will they win? Someone asked. Not if we do our job, said Cortez, arriving late with more case files. I've reviewed RICO convictions over the last decade. Prosecutors have a 73% success rate when they can prove the pattern, enterprise, and financial benefit. We have all three, and they are comprehensively documented. He pulled up a table showing the prosecution's case structure. Base: James Mitchell's original documents proving the model existed 19 years ago. Middle layer: Robert Chen's 17 years of case files proving continuous activity. Top layer: recent victims including Eli, proving the enterprise is still active. This is a pyramid of evidence where each layer supports and corroborates the others. What if they get convicted? Eli asked. Federal sentencing guidelines for RICO violations start at 20 years, said Brennan, joining them at the door. With charges of public corruption, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit murder in the Harlon and Keller case, the main defendants are expected to receive life sentences. Those with lesser roles could face 10 to 15 years. He addressed the room filled with victims. I want to be clear about what it means to testify. Defense attorneys will question your credibility. They will claim you lied to get attention or financial gain. They will bring up every mistake you've ever made, every minor offense, anything that could cause the jury to question your credibility. It won't be easy. Nothing about this has been easy, Tyrell Washington said quietly. But staying silent didn't protect us. Maybe fighting back will. The meeting lasted until evening. Testimonies were cross-referenced, timelines synchronized, evidence meticulously cataloged. What began as Eli's individual struggle transformed into a coalition of dozens of victims, each contributing a piece to the mosaic of systematic abuse. Around 9 p.m., David's phone rang. Another unknown number. He answered on speakerphone. Agent Mitchell, this is Gerald Vance. I represent Wade Harlon. My client wants to discuss a possible cooperation agreement. The room fell silent. Cooperation agreements meant that defendants would provide evidence against their accomplices in exchange for reduced sentences. If Harlon gave up the network, the prosecution's case would be exponentially stronger. What's he offering? David asked carefully. Everything. Names, dates, amounts. He'll testify about the seizure plan, the bribery structure, and Judge Crowley's involvement. He'll provide documents related to James Mitchell's death, who ordered it, who carried it out, who covered it up. What will he get in return? A reduced sentence. The murder conspiracy charge dropped. Minimum sentencing recommended for the RICO charges. 8 to 10 years in prison instead of life. David looked at Eli, at Eli's mother, at the room filled with victims. Why should we trust his testimony? He's been lying for 19 years. Why should we believe him now? Because he's terrified, Vance replied plainly. He spent 2 weeks in federal custody with the defendants who incriminated him during the investigation. He received 3 threats from other inmates connected to the people he arrested. He realized that Gideon Rohr and Judge Crowley would state that the individual officers acted alone, that there was no organization, and that Harlon and Keller were lone bandits. He's being made the scapegoat. Fine, Eli's mother said sharply. Let him fall. Mrs. Mitchell, I understand your anger, Vance said, having clearly done his research. But my client's testimony could convict everyone involved. Without him, Rohr and Crowley could walk free. With him, justice will be served for your husband and all the other victims. The room was abuzz with debate, some victims wanting the harshest punishment for all the defendants, others ready to settle for guaranteed convictions. David allowed the arguments, allowed the anger, the pain, and the desire for justice to flow, then finally asked for silence. This isn't our decision, he said. It's Brennan's. But if Harlan's testimony is credible, if it leads to convictions for Rohr, Crowley, and all the other defendants, then a reduced sentence might be worth it. That's not justice, Eli said quietly. No, David agreed. It's a strategy. Sometimes you sacrifice the perfect outcome to secure accountability. If Harlan's testimony means Judge Crowley spends the rest of his life in prison, Gideon Rohr can never profit from corruption again, and this operation is completely dismantled, then allowing one defendant to serve less time might be worth it. Eli thought about the handcuffs on his wrists, Harlan's laughter echoing in the gas station parking lot, the grief and fear his mother had carried for 19 years. I want to hear what he has to say, If his testimony will bring true justice, I can accept a reduction in his sentence. But if he's lying, if he's trying to manipulate the system once again, then there will be no deal. Brennan made his decision that night, and Gerald Vance took his client to a secure federal facility for a plea session, a meeting where he would summarize his statement without making any legal commitment until prosecutors verified its accuracy. David attended the offer session with Cortez and Brennan and returned at 2 a.m. with records and documents that painted the most comprehensive picture yet of the crime syndicate's activities. "He gave us everything," David said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. "Organizational structure, payment methods, intimidation protocols, and most importantly, he gave us Judge Crowley, who ran the entire operation from the bench, using his legal authority to cover up systematic theft." He played part of the recordings. Harlan's voice, stripped of its previous airiness, detailed how the system worked. Crowley identified vulnerable targets through court proceedings. Officers made stops under false pretenses. Rohr's company seized and sold the vehicles, and the profits were laundered through consulting fees and bribes. "What about James Mitchell?" Eli's mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Harlan drove the car," David said quietly. "Keller gave directions, but Judge Crowley ordered it. James had documents that would expose the entire operation. Crowley told Harlan and Keller that eliminating this threat was necessary to protect everyone's livelihood. They took James out of the picture, and Crowley ruled it an accident to close the investigation." The recording played Harlan's confession. "We didn't want to kill him. We just wanted to scare him into keeping quiet. But the accident turned out worse than we planned, and after he died, Crowley said we had to cover it up, or we'd all be ruined." Eli watched a flicker of emotion cross his mother's face, a mix of sorrow, anger, and bitter satisfaction. 19 years of curiosity, suspicion, but never knowing for sure, was finally resolved with documented facts. "So Crowley will get life in prison," he said. "That's the deal." If Harlan's testimony is credible at trial, yes, Brennan confirmed. Crowley's lawyer will question Harlan's credibility, claim he lied to get a lighter sentence, but will corroborate every detail with financial records, phone data, and victim statements. When we're done, the jury won't have any room for doubt. As dawn broke over the small house, painting the windows amber and gold, Eli stood before those windows, watching the morning traffic begin its daily routine. Somewhere in this city, Judge Crowley was being held in federal custody after decades of corruption finally came to light. Wade Harlon was rehearsing the testimony that would destroy his former boss, and a network that had operated with impunity for 19 years was collapsing under the weight of evidence it never imagined would survive. "Are you okay?" David asked, approaching the window. "I'm getting there," Eli replied. "I'm still trying to process how that gas station stop led to the collapse of an entire criminal conspiracy." "It wasn't just one stop," David gently corrected. "They were victims waiting for someone to listen for decades. You weren't the first person Harlan belittled. You were just the first person whose father had the resources to fight and the determination to see it through." "James's father," Eli said. "At least biologically." "Both of our fathers," David replied, placing his hand on Eli's shoulder. "James gave you the courage to tell the truth. I provided the tools to document it. Together we're finishing what he started." The morning sun rose and erased the last shadows of the night. The trial would begin in 6 weeks. Witnesses would testify, evidence would be presented, and a jury of 12 citizens would decide whether systematic corruption, carried out under the guise of the law, would be held accountable. But for now, in this moment, Eli Turner stood in the house where his biological father had once lived, surrounded by the people his father surrounded by the people his father had tried to protect, watching as the sunrise finally found its voice, illuminating the community. Justice was coming. Slowly, perhaps. Imperfectly, perhaps. But inevitably and undeniably. And that was enough. 6 weeks later, the federal courtroom was packed for the nationally watched trial. 12 jurors, carefully selected over a 3-day process, diverse in age, race, and background, took their seats as the morning sun streamed in through the high windows. Judge Harriet Morrison presided over the trial with an authority that made even experienced lawyers sit up straight in their chairs. Eli sat in the front row of the spectator gallery, between David and his mother, watching as the 18 defendants and their attorneys occupied multiple tables. Wade Harlon sat apart from the others. The plea agreement had isolated him, both legally and physically, from his former accomplices, who now viewed him as a traitor. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Brennan rose to deliver his opening statement, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about the abuse of power, the betrayal of trust, and justice delayed but ultimately served. For 19 years, these defendants ran a criminal enterprise under the protection of law enforcement. They targeted defenseless citizens, stole property, and when faced with the threat of exposure, they killed the man who dared to document their crimes." He displayed a photo of James Mitchell on the courtroom screens, a young mechanic in work clothes, smiling next to an old car he had restored. James Mitchell was 32 years old when he died. He left behind his 3-month-old son Eli, his grieving widow, and the corruption documents that his killers thought they had buried with him. But the truth doesn't stay buried, it waits. Brennan methodically summarized the prosecution's case: the seizure scheme that generated $4.7 million over 10 years, the bribery structure that enriched officials and judges, the systematic targeting of minority citizens, and the murder of James Mitchell, planned by Judge Crowley and carried out by Officers Harlon and Keller. The defense will argue that this was a coincidence, and that these were independent actors, that the financial payments were legitimate business expenses, Brennan continued, but the evidence will show 20 years of organization, coordination, and criminal intent. When you hear all the testimony, you will understand that this was not policing, it was badge-wearing extortion. The defense attorneys took turns delivering their opening statements, arguing that it was a misunderstanding, legitimate law enforcement, and a tragic accident, not murder. However, their arguments fell flat in the face of the weight of the evidence Brennan had previously presented. The first week of the trial focused on financial documents. Expert witnesses traced the money through shell companies and showed that vehicles worth millions of dollars and that the difference had disappeared as consulting fees and bribes. Forensic accountants revealed patterns that could not be explained by coincidence. Payments to Judge Crowley's law firm spiked immediately after favorable rulings. Bonuses paid to officials matched the seizure quotas. Eli observed that the jurors took meticulous notes, their statements shifting from skeptical scrutiny to harsh understanding as the financial web unfolded. The second week featured testimony from victims. Terrell Washington recounted how his car was seized 3 years ago, how he lost his job because he couldn't get to work, and how he helplessly watched Judge Crowley deny all his appeals. Patricia Johnson described how her brother was fatally shot during a traffic stop, how the gun was never found, and that the investigation had been inconclusive. 47 victims recounted their stories one by one, a mosaic of systematic abuse revealing undeniable patterns. Defense attorneys attempted to find gaps by suggesting faulty memories or ulterior motives, but the consistency of the seemingly unrelated testimonies made dismissal of the case impossible. On the 12th day, Eli took the witness stand. The morning sun illuminated the witness stand as he swore in, his hands steady despite his racing heart. Brennan recounted the gas station incident to him with gentle sensitivity. Describe Officer Harlon's reaction when you said your father was an FBI agent. He laughed, Eli said clearly. He made a joke to the crowd. Then he got even angrier, more aggressive. It was as if I had challenged him by saying someone would protect me. What happened to your phone? It fell when he handcuffed me. He said oops as if it were an accident. But he pulled my arm so hard I couldn't hold it. Then he stepped on it, crushing it as if he wanted to break it. How tight were the handcuffs? Eli showed his wrists, which still had faint marks visible 3 months later. They were tight enough to cut off circulation, tight enough to leave marks for weeks. I told him the handcuffs were too tight. He said it was fine. Brennan showed the jury photos taken that afternoon. Eli's bruised wrists, the shattered phone, witnesses who recorded the incident. What was going through your mind while you were handcuffed in that patrol car? Eli paused, choosing his words carefully. I thought about my biological father. I thought about James Mitchell, killed by the same cops who humiliated me, left alone on the highway. I thought about how he tried to expose this corruption, and was silenced. And I decided I wouldn't be silenced. No matter what, I would make sure people knew the truth. In the courtroom, there was complete silence, except for the light tapping of the court clerk's fingers on the keys. Gerald Vance, the defense attorney representing the defendants other than Harlon, began cross-examining him with aggressive sensitivity. Mr. Turner, do you admit that you lingered at that gas station for more than 40 minutes? I was waiting for my mother, Eli corrected. My car had broken down. I had a right to be there, and you immediately got into a confrontation with Officer Harlon. When he asked me if I had any important connections, I told him my father was an FBI agent. That's not a confrontation. That's answering a question. Don't you think mentioning your father's position was an attempt to intimidate an officer? I think mentioning my father's position should have made Officer Harlon realize I wasn't a criminal, Eli replied calmly, but instead it made him more aggressive, as if he needed to prove his authority by humiliating me in front of the witnesses. Vance tried several more angles, but Eli's testimony remained consistent, calm, realistic, unshakable. When he stepped down from the stand 3 hours later, several jurors nodded their heads as if impressed by his composure under pressure. The third week brought the critical testimony. Wade Harlon, immunity agreement in hand, described the operation from the inside. Judge Crowley ran everything, Harlon testified, his previous cocky demeanor completely gone. He would set targets through court cases, people dealing with traffic tickets, petty crimes, anything that brought them into the courtroom. If they seemed vulnerable, If they had assets worth seizing, he would pass the information to Gideon Rohr. Rohr would tell us who to stop. What happened next? Brennan asked. We'd find a reason. No turn signal, broken tail light, anything that provided a reasonable cause to stop them. Then we'd search, find something, plant something if necessary, and seize the vehicle. Rohr's company would tow it off and auction it, and we'd all get paid a consulting fee. How much did you personally get? $27,000 over 8 years. Harlan's voice was flat and matter-of-fact, plus overtime for testifying at the impound hearings. Judge Crowley always ruled in favor of impound, and we got paid for the time we spent in court. The testimony continued for 2 days, and Harlan explained in detail how the company operated. Defense attorneys ruthlessly questioned his credibility, but financial records corroborated every payment he described. Phone records confirmed the coordination he detailed, and the victim's statements matched the patterns he summarized. On the 17th day, Brennan asked the question everyone was waiting for. Tell the jury about James Mitchell. Harlan took a deep breath. Mitchell was a mechanic. He documented every suspicious seizure he witnessed. License plates, officers' names, auction dates, everything. He gave his documents to a lawyer named Marcus Wells. Judge Crowley learned this through his court connections. What happened? Crowley called a meeting. He said Wells was a threat to all of us, that if the evidence reached state police, we'd all go to jail. Wells died in a house fire 2 weeks later. Then Crowley said Mitchell still had copies and planned to go to federal authorities. Crowley ordered Brent Keller, me, and himself to eliminate the threat. The courtroom was completely silent. Eli's mother gripped the bench in front of her, her knuckles white. What does eliminate the threat mean? Brennan asked quietly. Kill him. Harlan's voice cracked slightly. Make it look like an accident. One night we followed Mitchell's car, forced him off the road on Highway 17. His car plunged into a ravine. He died on impact. Crowley ruled it an accident, closed the investigation, and the threat was eliminated. You wanted to kill James Mitchell. No. Harlan looked directly at Eli's mother. We wanted to scare him into silence. But once he was dead, there was no turning back. Crowley said that if we didn't cover it up, we'd all be tried for murder. So we kept the truth hidden for 19 years. Eli felt his mother trembling beside him. David quietly put his arm around his mother's shoulders as she cried. These tears were not only from grief, but also from the great relief of finally learning the truth after years of doubt. The defense's cross-examination lasted 6 hours, questioning every aspect of Harlan's testimony, claiming he lied to reduce his sentence, that his memory was faulty. However, the financial records did not lie. The phone records did not lie. The paint transfer analysis taken from James's car, which matched the patrol car's characteristics, did not lie. By the 4th week, the prosecution had presented such a comprehensive case that even the defense attorneys seemed defeated. The defense argued that individual police officers acted alone, that Judge Crowley was merely enforcing the forfeiture law, and that James Mitchell's death was truly accidental. They brought in their own experts and their own interpretations of the evidence. However, the jury's statements showed they did not accept this. On a bright December morning, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury foreman stood up and read the verdict covering 18 defendants and 73 charges. The United States of America vs. Judge Thomas Crowley. First charge, forming an organized crime syndicate. We find the defendant guilty. Eli's mother exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for 19 years. The verdicts continued. Guilty, guilty, guilty. All 73 charges, all 18 defendants. The jury believed the evidence, the victims, and that the systematic corruption committed under the guise of the law demanded accountability. Judge Crowley sat motionless as the charges piled up, his former arrogance replaced by a hollow acceptance that his decades-long reign of power had finally come to an end. Gideon Rohr's confident smirk faded with the guilty verdicts piling up against him. One by one, the defendants realized that the system they had corrupted had finally turned against them. The verdict was delivered 6 weeks later. Judge Morrison took the time to address each defendant individually before announcing the sentence. Thomas Crowley, you corrupted the office you swore to protect. You turned the law into a weapon, justice into theft, and when faced with the threat of exposure, you ordered a murder. For the crimes of extortion, corruption, and conspiracy to commit murder, I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Crowley showed no reaction, but his lawyer's shoulders slumped in defeat. Brent Keller, you carried out Judge Crowley's orders, forced James Mitchell off the highway, and helped cover up the murder for 19 years. Life in prison without parole. Gideon Rohr received a 35-year prison sentence. Those who played lesser roles received sentences ranging from 8 to 25 years. By the time Morrison handed down his sentence, the network, which had operated with impunity for 20 years, had been sentenced to a total of 487 years in prison. Wade Harlon, who told the truth, received a 12-year prison sentence as part of a cooperation agreement. This was much less than a life sentence, but it was still a significant time for his crimes. As the marshals led the convicted defendants away, Eli watched them walk through the courthouse doors into the federal detention center, where they would spend the rest of their lives paying for their corruption. Outside the courthouse, the media surrounded the prosecution team and the victims. The bright afternoon sun illuminated the granite steps where protesters had chanted for justice months earlier. Brennan addressed the cameras. Today's sentences show that the reckoning for 20 years of systematic abuse has come. James Mitchell tried to expose this corruption 19 years ago and paid for it with his life. But his documents, his courage, and his son's refusal to remain silent ultimately delivered the justice for which he died. Eli's mother approached the microphone, her voice steady despite her emotion. "My husband was killed for telling the truth. For 19 years I thought his death meant nothing, that the corruption he documented would continue forever. But the truth doesn't die. It waits. And today the truth that James Mitchell uncovered has brought life sentences to his killers and justice to hundreds of victims." Reporters shouted questions, but she raised her hand for silence. If you're watching this and thinking about staying silent about abuse, corruption, injustice, don't. Documentation matters. Truth matters. And sometimes, even if it takes 19 years, justice finds its place. Eli stood beside him and thought of the gas station parking lot where it all began, the handcuffs digging into his wrists, Harlan's laughter echoing off the asphalt. This humiliation had triggered a federal investigation, exposed a criminal conspiracy, and ensured accountability that would protect countless future victims. "What's next?" a reporter asked Eli. "Law school," he replied. "I want to be a civil rights lawyer. I want to fight for people who can't fight for themselves, who are up against corrupt systems that seem too powerful to challenge." Today proved that these systems can be defeated with evidence, courage, and people willing to stand up. When the press conference ended and the crowd dispersed, David pulled Eli aside. "How are you?" "Better," Eli said honestly. "It matters to see Crowley sentenced to life in prison for ordering James's murder. It matters to know they'll all serve decades in prison. It won't bring James back, but his death accomplished something. More than one thing," David corrected. "Everything. The forfeiture laws in this state are being changed because of this case. Police accountability measures are being implemented, and hundreds of victims are getting their seized property back or receiving compensation." James's documents started all of this. On a day when the December afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, David's car, Ulnai's mother, joined them, looking somehow lighter, as if the burden she had carried for 19 years had finally been lifted. "I'm selling the house," she announced. "We don't need it anymore. The fight is over. Justice has been served. We can finally relax." "Keep the mechanic's certificate," Eli said. "James's certificate. I want it." She smiled through fresh tears. "Of course. It's yours. His legacy, his courage. It's all yours now." 3 months later, on a bright March afternoon, Eli was parked in Miller's gas station. The refrigerator hummed with its familiar rhythm. The security cameras, new ones installed after the robbery, flashed their red recording lights. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that October day when Wade Harlon had forced him to his knees. But everything was different. Marcus stepped out of the station, no longer the frightened employee watching silently. He had testified at the trial, his courage inspiring other witnesses to come forward. "Eli, good to see you. How's college going?" "Yeah. Finals next month, then summer break." Eli looked at the spot where he had been handcuffed. "I wanted to come back here, to see how it felt. And, less scary than I expected, it's just a gas station again, not a symbol of powerlessness." A patrol car pulled into the parking lot, a new officer, part of the new department under federal oversight after the corruption came to light. The officer nodded politely to Eli, filled up his tank, and left without incident. Normal policing, professional conduct, no showmanship, no intimidation. "Things are different now," Marcus said. "New chief, new policies, federal oversight. It doesn't mean the job is done, but it's a start." "Yes," Eli agreed. "A start." His phone rang. A message from Deshawn. "I got into Howard University's law prep program. I'm following your example. I'm going to be a human rights lawyer too." Eli smiled and wrote a congratulatory message. The struggle that began in this parking lot was spreading, encouraging others to turn pain into purpose, victimhood into advocacy. David arrived in his SUV that October afternoon. Same state license plate, same quiet authority. They went to Pine Hill Cemetery on the edge of town, the afternoon sun bathing the marble gravestones in warm light. James Mitchell's grave stood under an oak tree, the stone simple and clear. Beloved husband, father, and truth-teller. Eli knelt down, placing his hand on the sun-warmed marble. "We did it." Judge Crowley was sentenced to life in prison. Harlan and Keller were sentenced to life in prison. Everyone involved in the case is behind bars. And the system you tried to expose is finally undergoing reform. The wind rustled the oak leaves above their heads, making soft sounds like a whispering affirmation. "I'm going to law school," Eli continued. "I'll fight the same fight you did, but with tools and resources you never had. It started with your documents. Your courage inspired me. And your death won't be in vain because hundreds of people are safer now because you refused to remain silent." He stood up and looked at David, who was waiting respectfully in the distance. "You gave me courage. David gave me tools. Together you made justice possible." As they returned to the city, as the March sun bathed the highway in golden afternoon light, Eli thought about the journey from that October humiliation to this March closure. 6 months that changed his life, exposed systematic corruption, and ensured accountability that would protect countless future victims. "Will you come back here?" David asked. "After law school?" "Maybe," Eli replied. "There's work to be done everywhere. Corruption to expose, systems to reform, victims who need advocates. But it all started here. Here I learned that speaking the truth can be dangerous, but that silence is worse." "James would be proud," David said quietly, "of your courage, your conviction, your refusal to be silenced. You're carrying on his legacy." "We both are," Eli corrected. "For 19 years, you kept his documents safe, waiting for the moment justice would finally prevail. That is also carrying on his legacy." The highway stretched toward a future Eli couldn't yet fully see. Law school, a career, battles yet to be fought. But behind him lay 6 months of proof that corrupt systems could be defeated, that truth ultimately mattered, and that sometimes one person's courage to speak up could change everything. Miller's gas station receded in the rearview mirror. No longer a symbol of powerlessness but a reminder of where justice began, a young man refusing to stay silent, a father refusing to look away, and a community finally finding the courage to come together. The sun continued to set in the afternoon, painting the world in amber and gold tones. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new injustices demanding attention. But today, justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and 19 years after James Mitchell's death, it had finally, inevitably, resulted in accountability that would protect the vulnerable in the years to come. Eli Turner, a 19-year-old university student, the son of 2 fathers who had taught him different kinds of courage, closed his eyes and let the afternoon sun warm his face through the car window. The struggle was not over. It would never be over. But today, victory felt real. And that was enough.